Hi guys, and welcome to another episode of Kabir Considers. In this video, this is going to be an interesting one. We're going to react to discoveries that confirm parts of the Bible to be real, genuine events that actually happened. Like, this is a really important topic for me because, I was raised in a religious family, but these days I consider myself agnostic for sure. So I do believe that there's something out there, but I don't know what form that takes, whether it's some kind of, Abrahamic God type figure, or if it's just some kind of energy like karma. I don't know, but I don't, I'm quite an evidence-based person. Like, I need to see, or I'd like to see examples of things before I can, consider something true or real. So if I can, if somebody was to show me evidence that, this particular god or deity was real, they existed, they actually did this, absolutely, I would completely change, my perspective on that thing overnight, as soon as I see evidence. So yeah, this video, if it can actually show me compelling evidence, of the Bible being real, yeah, I'm all for it.
Today's video is brought to you by Wondrium, which is helping you sate your curiosity about, well, everything. It's where you'll find answers to literally everything you've ever wanted to learn about, and maybe some stuff that you never even thought about learning about. And when I say everything, we mean it. There's Ivy League professors basically handing out an expert education in classical Greco-Roman history channels, then stuff to explore that you'd never thought about learning before. We always try to make recommendations for this. If you're curious by nature, you just have to head over to Wondrium. And right now, you guys can head to wondrium.com/sideprojects for a free trial to check it out. That's wondrium.com/sideprojects, or just follow the link in the description box below. I highly recommend it. And now today's video.
All right.
The Bible is the best-selling book of all time, with an estimated 5 billion copies ever been produced and sold.
Wow.
The importance that the Bible has had in shaping human history
5 billion.
couldn't be overstated, but there are many different interpretations of the book. To some, the Bible is the work of God, with every word meant to be taken literally. To others, it's a combination of history and parables, figurative metaphors intended to teach some moral lesson rather than being treated as literal events. And of course, to many people, it's nothing more than a work of fiction. Despite controversy over the contents of the book, scholars generally agree that Jesus was a real historical figure. The consensus is that he was baptized by John the Baptist, debated Jewish authorities on the subject of God, and was crucified by Pontius Pilate, the 5th governor of the Roman province of Judea. All other aspects of the life of the historical Jesus are much more contested. In addition to writings by Christians, Jesus, his followers, and his crucifixion are mentioned by several Roman historians as well, such as Pliny the Younger and Tacitus. However, though these historical references have brought about a general consensus on the existence of the historical Jesus, there isn't actually any direct evidence.
Wasn't there a discovery recently? I think it's the Shroud of Christ, an actual item of clothing worn by Jesus. I need to look into that. Was that an actually proven item that he wore?
No relic or artifact that is claimed to be tied to Jesus is proven to be authentic. But the Bible is a big book, and there's lots of stuff going on in it, and much of the Old Testament is intended as a historical record of the origins of the Israelites. It's no surprise then that discoveries have been found that confirm parts of the book to be based in fact rather than in fiction. Menepetar, the son of Ramesses the Great, was an Egyptian pharaoh for 10 years during the late 13th century BC. In 1896, an inscription was found in Thebes that became known as the Menepetar Steely. The Steely was 28 lines long and chronicled Menepetar's victory over the ancient Libyans. However, the last 3 lines of the Steely shift away from the Libyans into the region of Canaan. In this section, it is stated that Israel is laid waste. This inscription is the oldest non-biblical reference to Israel and the only reference from ancient Egypt. This was a massive discovery, as the Old Testament is largely viewed by historians as more of a national myth than an accurate historical chronicle by the Israelites. Thanks to the discovery of the Menepetar Steely, it is known that Israel was its own nation with its own culture, occupying a land in Canaan as far back as at least the 13th century BC.
That's quite an interesting bit of information there. just considering what's going on in that region right now, I'm sure there would be some people who, on hearing what we just heard, will celebrate that. But I'm sure there will be others who, that makes angry. I'm not going to go anywhere near that.
Aside from Jesus, no character in the Bible has as much depth and character development as King David. David was essentially a nobody. His family was not wealthy or important, and he was the smallest of 8 brothers. Following a message from God, David was secretly named Israel's true king before going on to become its greatest king. David conquered Jerusalem, which was then made Israel's political and cultural center. He annexed the coastal lands, and he defeated the Philistines with such severity that they would never dare threaten the Israelites again. And for a long time, scholars believed that he was entirely fictitious. In 1993, an archaeological team was studying Tel Dan, a city from ancient Israel. In the research, they discovered remnants of a stone wall. The wall bore an inscription, though the entire inscription did not remain intact. It was written in Aramaic, and it details victories over 2 kings of Israel. The first name is partially cut off, but it almost certainly reads Jehoram, son of Ahab. The other king does not appear to be mentioned by name, only identified as the king of the house of David. The Tel Dan inscription is dated to the 9th century BC, and this simple message of battle corroborates many passages from the Bible. To start, the house of David would mean the lineage of King David. This was only written roughly 150 years after King David would have died, which seems like too short of a time for someone to fraudulently attempt to establish a noble family lineage to a king that never even existed. It's not definitive proof that King David existed, but it certainly is evidence that it's more likely true than not. The inscription also points to other passages from the Book of Kings being true as well. Though Aramaic was common amongst the Israelites, the government and the wealthier citizens predominantly wrote in Hebrew. Had this conflict come from within the nation of Israel, the inscription surely would have been in Hebrew. According to the Bible, Jehoram was killed by the Aramean king Hazael, whose language would have been Aramaic. The dates of Hazael's reign line up with the date of the Tel Dan inscription, so the biblical Book of Kings is likely more fact than fiction.
I mean, everything he said there makes sense. I guess, has the area been like excavated in totality? Because there's probably, but then it's a religious site, isn't it? Like, you can't really just go there and just start digging massive holes looking for evidence. But potentially, it sounds like in that same area where they found that broken up tablet with the Aramaic language on there, that there's probably a lot more that could, either corroborate it, like agree with, what's in the Bible and prove it actually existed or not. We could get some like actual answers.
King Solomon is portrayed as a wise, powerful, and wealthy king of Israel. Like David, he was one of the 48 Jewish prophets. Also like David, there was a healthy dispute over whether or not Solomon ever existed. Regardless of whether Solomon existed, both sides generally agreed that the lavishness of the Israelite empire during this time period is an exaggeration. It's also unlikely that the story of Solomon's judgment, in which he proposed cutting a baby in half to deduce who the real mother was, is an historical event. There were many similar stories in folklore from that region, and while the account of Solomon is the oldest written example, others could have predated it in oral tradition. Archaeological excavations at the settlements of Azor, Gezer, and Megiddo have uncovered 6 chambered gates that allegedly date back to the 10th century BC, when biblical chronology states that Solomon would have been king. These gates would provide evidence of the impressive construction that the Bible claims took place under Solomon's reign. There is some disagreement on the dating of these gates, particularly at Gezer, with some scholars believing that they were built centuries later. There are no references to King Solomon in any historical texts outside of the Bible, something that could call his entire existence into question. However, this is not necessarily...
But is that really, because considering we're talking over 2,000 years ago, is it that unheard of to not find any actual historical evidence that a king existed over in that sort of time frame? But then again, like the Mayan Empire and things like that, and the Aztecs, we found a lot of material that proves that they existed in their kings and stuff. So maybe we should be able to find stuff that shows that King Solomon was actually a person.
Necessarily meaningful on its own. One of the things that made Solomon's reign so unusual was that it was a time of peace, with no wars or battles fought at all. Records from 3,000 years ago are scarce to begin with, and if King Solomon wasn't leading an army into battle against anyone, there wouldn't have been much of note for those outside of Israel to write about. These three gates may not provide as strong evidence for the existence of Solomon as the Tel Dan inscription did for the existence of David, but if they are indeed from the 10th century BC, then they corroborate much of the Bible's text regarding the construction and renovation that took place under Solomon's reign, even if these projects weren't quite as extravagant as the Bible may make them out to be.
3 gates. I mean, those pillars, it's just not enough. Somebody needs to invent a time machine. That's what we really, really, really need. But it's probably invented already, and they've come back to visit us. I'm going too far down the science fiction rabbit hole.
In 1868, the Moabite stone was found at the ancient site of Dibon in what is modern-day Deban in Jordan. A papier-mâché impression of the stone was made on behalf of an archaeologist based in Jerusalem. At the time, the area was being heavily scoured for any evidence that would prove the historical accuracy of the Bible. When word got out about the Moabite stone, France, England, and Germany all set forth trying to acquire the valuable piece of history. The Bani Hamida tribe, who were in possession of the stone, didn't like the idea of these other nations coming in and laying claim to the artifact, so in an act
Which is fair enough.
of defiance, they smashed it into several pieces and sold it on the antiquities market. Many of these pieces have been recovered, though not all of them. So why is the Moabite stone so important? The translation of the stone has been updated several times to become more accurate, but the general meaning remains the same. The 34 lines of text begin, "I am Mesha, son of Chemosh-Gad, king of Moab." The stone is most likely a victory stone designed to explain who Mesha was and to outline his military victories. In the text, Mesha tells of his war against the Israelites and their king, Jehoram. This same war is outlined in the Bible's Book of Kings. The accounts aren't identical, but if anything, this highlights their authenticity as being depictions of the same conflict from opposing viewpoints. The Moabite stone emphasizes Mesha's victories over Israel and the capturing of cities. On the other hand, the Bible places the emphasis on Israel's successful counterattacks against the Moabites. These two accounts don't contradict one another. They simply tell the opposing sides of the same story, with each side playing up their own victories and ignoring their own defeats. This provides further evidence that much of the Old Testament history of the Israelites may indeed be an accurate telling of events as told from their point of view, even if some details, particularly in regards to King Solomon, were exaggerated.
2 things there. So the Moabite stone, like, I understand the desire for you to not want to sell it abroad, but then why would you destroy it? Why not just say, no, we're not going to sell it to you? Just keep it somewhere safe, hidden. And the other thing is, how do they even translate the language? Because, I assume the language it was written in, I didn't recognize it, unless there's languages that, like modern day ones that are similar, so that you can then use that as a frame of reference. How do you translate a language from 2,000 years ago? I find that amazing, right?
Though there was thought to be some truth to it, the Book of Exodus has long been considered by scholars to be the founding myth of the Israelites rather than a particularly historical account. The book follows the exodus of the Israelites out of Egypt and into the promised land of Canaan. We know from the Maite Stone that the Israelites had established themselves in Canaan by the 13th century. But how much of what happened before then could be historically accurate? Perhaps the most famous portion of the Book of Exodus is when Moses parts the Red Sea, allowing the Israelites to walk across the water before it comes crashing back down to drown the Pharaoh's army. There is no non-biblical evidence that such an event ever occurred. Indeed, the story sounds like the sort of thing that would have to be taken entirely on faith. However, recent research has discovered that such an event is actually scientifically possible. There are 2 key elements of the story that are extremely important, one of which is often overlooked. In movies like The 10 Commandments, Moses is always depicted as raising his arms and causing the sea to immediately part by the will of God. However, this isn't actually how it's described in the biblical text. The King James translation of Exodus 14:21 reads, "And Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord caused the sea to go back by a strong east wind all that night, and made the sea dry land land, and the waters were divided. Across all translations.
Fairly similar. I mean, Moses stretched out his hand. Fairly similar description.
The important part of this passage does not change. The sea did not instantly part, but rather it was the result of a strong wind blowing for an entire night. The other key element of the story is the discrepancy in translations. While Moses is often cited as parting the Red Sea, the more accurate translation is believed to be the Sea of Reeds. This leads to some assumptions on behalf of researchers as to the exact topology of the area at the time and where the Sea of Reeds would have been, but they found a candidate. Just south of the Mediterranean Sea is Tarketanis, which it is believed would have met with the Nile Delta thousands of years ago when this event would have taken place. Lake Tanis was still an ideal place for wild reeds to grow, which lends some credence to the idea that this area could have been the Sea of Reeds. Whether this was the actual location of the story or not, the parting sea could have been the result of a wind setdown. This is a coastal phenomenon where extended periods of strong wind push the water back completely. It's not just a hypothetical scenario either, as it is something that has been seen fairly recently both at the Nile Delta and in Lake Erie. If the proposed location is correct, easterly winds exceeding 60 miles per hour for the entire night could have pushed back the water, creating a land bridge with water on either side. Kabir models exactly what this weather pattern would have done showed that the Israelites would have had 4 or 5 hours to cross the land bridge of roughly 1.8 to 2.5 miles in length. Even with the terrain likely being muddy, that's an extremely reasonable pace. Once the wind stops, the water would come crashing back and cover the newly created land.
To see something like that in reality would just be, I would think it was an act of God. You know, to see like a quantity of water that big just be immediately pushed back and you can see dry land and walk on it. Like, yeah, you can see how people who were alive back then, you know, if it actually happened, would think, yeah, this is miraculous, you know?
Bridge. Though this doesn't confirm the parting of the Sea of Reeds happening, it shows that it is absolutely possible that it could have happened, especially taking into account that the Bible specifically notes that it took an entire night for the water to recede rather than being
instantaneous.
Even if this was a real historical event, the idea of the Pharaoh's chariots being in hot pursuit and then being drowned by the waters, while very technically possible, would likely be a bit of an embellishment. It just goes to show that even stories that were largely dismissed as fiction could have a basis in historical fact.
Very, very interesting. I mean, has that video changed my perception on Christianity, religion? I mean, to be honest, a little bit. Just hearing that a lot of the events described within the Bible and the people involved more than likely were actually real people. Some of the events, you know, even the most sort of like biblical of events, like the parting of the Red Sea and things like that, are possible. You know, it definitely adds a lot of, in my mind, credence and stuff like that, and just real sort of possibility. I think as time goes on, we'll definitely discover more. I think there's probably a lot of secrets that are deep down underground, you know, because obviously as time goes on and we just build atop, things, historical things just get pushed down. Like if there was ever, I don't know enough about this because there might have been already like mass sort of excavations of those areas, those historical areas of significance. They would probably find so much. Thanks for watching, guys. If you enjoy my videos, please help me out by liking and subscribing.